to you will not be able to see whether or not your test question is valid, because you cannot in any way perform the needs the needs analysis for that item. Okay. Because you have to revisit whether or not you were able to satisfy and to give justice to the learning outcomes or objectives you have placed in your in your table of specifications as regards how you teach that in the class. Okay. Now, it also provides teacher with evidence. This is what I'm talking about. Evidence that a test has content validity and it covers what should be covered. It's valid because what you have placed in your questionnaire or in your exam were all covered in the discussion. It's valid because you only included those that were discussed in the class. Because sometimes we miss out this point that we are including items which were not covered in our discussion. Okay. Okay, here are the steps. Okay, let's go proceed to steps in preparing table of specifications. This is where we have to go to the very detail of how we practically prepare our TOS. So we have to construct, the construction was a while when we have to see for ourselves how the table should look like. Okay. Now granting that you have already placed, or now if you have in your institution, let's now have to go through the steps of preparing what's within the table of specifications. Okay, number one is you have to list down the covered topics for inclusion in the test. That's very important, because if you don't have the topic, of course, you'd not be able to construct some sort of questions out or some sort of questions that are included in the examination. So very, very simple, very, very easy. We have to list down the topics covered for inclusion in the tests and determine the objectives to be assessed by the test. Sometimes objectives are not placed on the table, okay? But probably it would help you go back and revisit your syllabus for that matter, because each topic is given an outcome or an objective in your syllabus. So right from there, you'd be able to already include what kind of assessment that you would be able to construct out from this topic. Okay. Next is specify the number of days or hours spent for teaching a particular topic. Now, some other schools also are not including this in the table because they can find this in the syllabus. Okay, because they can find this in the syllabus, like how many days or how many days or how many hours are allotted to what to this topic. So sometimes it is specified in the TOS, but others are not, because I said they can find it out from their syllabus. Okay. Okay, this is how. Determine percentage allocation of the tests or of the test items for each of the topics covered. So the formula applied is as follows. So the percentage for a topic equals the total numbers of days or hours spent. Okay, let's have an example here. Okay, as an example here is Mrs. Reyes utilized 10 hours for teaching the unit on photosynthesis. She spent 2 hours in teaching the topic chemical processes. So what percentage of test items should she allocate for the topic? The percentage for a topic. Now, it's 2 over 10 is equals to 0.20 or 20%. So only 20%, okay, only 20% is allocated for chemical process, knowing that she only spent 2 hours in teaching chemical processes. But that's just percentage. But the problem is, how many items do we have to allocate for that certain topic? So that's already the question, right? That's already the question. Now, let's go over and proceed. So we know how many items should be, allocated for this. Now you have to remember, if the number of hours spent, or if the number of days of hours spent for teaching a particular topic is not reflected in your TOS, you can always go back to your syllabus, because you cannot begin teaching a course without the syllabus. That's too much impossible, right? Otherwise, it's a hodgepodge of everything, and you place them together. I think it's a no, because I would want to check our teachers before, if for example there are new courses in the curriculum. I would always want the teachers to be checked upon on the syllabus they are going to use in the coming semester, because that's how we have to prepare for our learners. We could not go on to a battle without anything to bring. So that's how we would want to be true to our service to our learners. So I would check if there is already a syllabus for that certain course, and if these are all quite aligned to the description or descriptive title of the course, so that because the CHED sometimes do not or does not give topic outlines for a certain course, right? For a certain subject. So of course, the teacher who is in line or uh, expert of the field would be able to create topic outline for that and turn that into a syllabus with all the details in the syllabus. Okay, so if you are not able to include the days and the hours spent for teaching that particular topic, then you can go back to your syllabus. Okay, but it's also a freedom for you to be able to include the hours and the days that you have spent teaching a particular course, so that you will have to be able to calculate. Para dili siya lisod, no? Para dili siya lisod. Okay, so in determining the percentage, we have done that, and we have even given an example. So we're proceeding to the next one. Determine the number of the items for each topic, and this can be done by multiplying the percentage allocation for each topic by the total number of items to be constructed. Although sometimes, as per experience, we can always it's always not see it's not always a possibility to do the other way, because it would always be an adjustment of one and the adjustment of other to make it 100%. That's too much, that's too much difficult. Okay, that's too much difficult, and that would consume time. Okay, now how do you do that? This can be done by multiplying the percentage that we got a while ago for each topic. So the topic that we have just actually identified a while ago was of the chemical processes, right? Chemical process has 20% out of the 10 hours spent for teaching photosynthesis. And chemical process is part of photosynthesis, as it may have to be taught about 10 hours, for example, in science. Now, how do we determine the number of items? Now, for example, Ms. Reyes decided to prepare a 50-item test on the unit photosynthesis. So how many items should she write for the chemical process? So 50 items times 0.02 is equals to 10. So there are 10 items given to photosynthesis. Now, from the 10 items, you have to decide which one is going to, what kind of assessment would be fit. Okay, because multiple choice cannot fit all. Okay, you have to remember that, and we all know that. You have to decide. And now, even you have already decided, you have to take note that these items should also contain the Bloom's taxonomy, because that's also very important. We could not just afford our test to be all knowing or the knowledge. So it should be scattered all throughout. It might not be very much necessarily scattered all throughout of these Bloom's taxonomy, but at least everything should not be knowledge or knowing. Okay, so we will now talk about that later. Okay, so that's how we allocate number of items. Okay, then distribute the numbers to the objectives, and the number of items allocated for each objective depends on the degree of importance attached by the teacher to it. So of course, because you're the planner, you'd be able to determine those things. Okay, so as you are the ones who create and construct and prepare this table of specifications, then you all have the freedom to particularly give the weight and the total numbers allocated for each item. Okay, now here is an example. I'll be the next slides that I will be showing you are examples, different TOS examples, which I have gathered. But I'm not telling you which school is this one, right? For example, this one. So you have the course, and then you have the examination period. So these are the, these are the Bloom's taxonomy: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating, then the number of items, and then the percentage of items. Okay. So notice here, okay, that I have the topics, but I did not include that. I mean, it is not included here. It is not included here the number of hours that were spent in teaching the said topic. Okay, so Dr. James is very much familiar with the topic that I have here. So these are all things a topic. So I place there I utilize applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Okay, and creating. So you notice that I have 25 because I have 150 items. Okay, so it could be this way. Sometimes it works this way, no? That you'd be able to compute the items last if you have already identified the number of items. But supposedly a while ago, I was teaching you about how to particularly give, okay, the percentage. At this point, kasi, sometimes we have to remember that we have to do the right way. So if I have to topic number 1, and I place the evaluating a number of items here is just 20. Where did I get the 20? So it could always be the thought that the 20 is taken from the formula that we have used. Okay, from the formula that we have used. What formula is that one? So how many percent? Okay, I'm talking about percent. How many, okay, the percent here. How many hours did I teach this particular topic of the entire unit, for example? So that is just 13%. How many items should I give? That's 20%. Sorry, that's 20 items. Okay, that's 20 items. So, and that is placed in or across or in a particular Bloom's taxonomy, right? But I have here evaluating because I see how these students, I did not have placed here any kind of remembering and understanding, although that could really also work. But I'm trying to assess here the applying, the analyzing, the evaluating, and the creating, much more higher thinking order. But these are all things already very also helpful for our students, so that you would know that they remember some sort of concept, or they remember some sort of, definitions or whatnot, right? So these are all things that we can consider a phase of a certain table of specifications. Then you have prepared by, submitted, and then checked by, of course, the program coordinator. Now, this is another phase. What happened? Okay, wala. Okay, this one is another phase of table of specifications. You have the name, the instructor, the subject, the course, the year, and so on. These are all very specifics, no? And you have placed here the skills. Of course, it's very old, no? It should be knowing and so on and so forth. The way we are transforming that. So in here, knowledge pang ginamit nila, knowledge comprehension, application, analysis, and evaluation, and then the subtotal. Now, if you notice here, you have types of the test points. Ito, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. And these are actually placed as, these are actually placed as what? Legend right down below. Like 1 is for multiple choice, and 2 maybe but na doble ito. And then another type. So you can have what? Another legends or another type of assessment that you can place right in here. You have true or false or essay or what. Okay, so it all depends on how. So whatever legend that you have here, you may have to indicate right that in the, here in the type of test or the points. Okay, so it all depends. So for as long as you are guided by this legend, for example, if I would be giving you, or if you decided that this topic has only multiple choice, but it's in application, that's very much possible. Okay, it's very much possible. Or true or false, that is synthesis, that is also very much possible. Okay, so and so on and so forth. So you have here the subtotal, meaning the total of these items that sums up to also 100% down below. Okay, so whatever is the total item, you have to place it down here. And then whatever also is the total item right from here, subtotal is also placed. So you have 100 total points there, or 100%. Okay, so this is just another, phase of a table of specifications. So what is very much important is for you to be able to allocate the percentage and the title and the number of items that is supposed to be given to a particular to a particular topic. That's why much of the students would comment nga, kalisod ba tong exam ni sir o ni ma'am, wala man to sa ato coverage or wala man to sa ato discussed. It might be part of the topic, but it was not covered because you lack the time, but you seem to notice that this is part of the topic and you include some questions about it. That's too much unfair, right? So in the case that you have to particularly look into these topics, and you have to make sure that you were able to teach this in the class, or at least you were able to have these facilitated in the class, so that the justification of including questions or by creating questions out from those topics is justifiable in the examination. Okay, so again, you can devise other how do you call that, other forms. Other schools are just using, like, there's no legend. The legend is here is multiple choice is MC, matching time is empty, so they place here empty, okay, then 10 points, or MC, or that's application 13 points, and so on and so forth. Okay, so again, it's all up to the institution creating the table of specifications. So my look at my thought about that is, this is a blueprint. If you want it to very much comprehensive as you want, that's all yours. But if you want it to just be very simple, which would still measure, which would still measure the objectives that you have to go back and revisit into your syllabus, that's fine and good. But if you want to also even have more complicated than this, for example, it's not complicated. The thing is, we are able to know how to place items, number of items in the percentage for a particular topic. Okay, that's very much important. Okay, so these are all things that I think we need to relearn. As we have to revisit our knowledge on table of specifications preparation, and then constructing in preparation of table of specification. Okay, so at this point it's already 2:10. I'd like to continue with the second topic, which is actually, I think, very long, because this is actually very important, and I'd like to also give some time for the open forum as it is indicated in our program. Okay, these are principles on test construction, which we may have to be talking about criteria. Okay, which we may be talking about criteria. Now, for a psychological test, okay, I'm talking about psychological tests, okay, but sometimes it could be applied to any other tests. Okay, so the basis here from the resource where I take this is based on psychological, which actually is standardized already. But for a certain type of test that we give to our students, may it not be psychological, should also come across with these criteria: standardization, reliability, and validity. These are all very common to everybody, and it's not foreign to everyone about these words, because we've been using and we've been hearing about this in our assessments. Okay, now, what is this standardization? Involves administering tests to a representative sample of future test takers in order to establish a basis for meaningful comparison. Okay, I would not go much into details about the three criteria, because I'd like to give more focus on how and the guidelines of creating and constructing test questionnaires. So I'm just going to just move forward with these standardizations. That's what I said with normal curve, and so on and so forth, right? So the reliability, we have the reliability, split half, and then reliability using the different tests. And then we also have the validity, which means a test does not ensure, of a test does not ensure validity, and validity of a test refers to the degree in which the test is supposed to measure or predict. Okay, so there is content, there is criterion, and of course, construct validity. Okay, now what I'd like to, forgive me for skipping all those, because I think those are very, very simple and very, very common to everyone. Although principles of drafting multiple choice questions also is normal, but I mean very common. But I think there are a lot of things that we still need to incorporate into our constructing of tests items, because I can see this also. It's my experience with my teachers under my program. Okay, so principles on drafting multiple choice questions. So the multiple choice items can also be used to, or can be used to measure the knowledge or knowledge outcomes and various types of learning outcomes all across the Bloom's taxonomy. And they're most widely used for measuring the knowledge, comprehension, and application outcomes mostly, right? But there are still other things that are measured in the examination, but at least, or in multiple choice. But multiple choice cannot be true to all types of topics or types of content. Okay, there are others which are other assessments that can be used for those. Now, there's an advantage for making use of a multiple choice. Either that it's easy and quick to grade, that's very correct, right? And then reduce some of the burden of large classes, of course, because if you would want to just give them, how do you call it? Wait. Okay, if you just would want to have like your class, I'm not aware of how many students are there in your class, but you also would be able to take a look that advantage of this, because if you're giving multiple choice, then you have easy and quick to grade, and can access all levels of Bloom's taxonomy, the knowledge or the knowing and understanding, applying, and so on and so forth, right? The new terms that were used. And useful as diagnostic tool, because wrong choices can indicate weakness and misconceptions. And this is familiar to students. The disadvantage, however, is difficult and time-consuming to construct quality questions. This is very, very true. We just don't want to create questions of our liking. We just don't want to create items because we want it. But there are principles that we even need to obtain or to learn in constructing the questions. It can be ambiguous to students because principles may have not been followed. That's why it becomes ambiguous. That's why we have to also revisit this thing. It encourages also students to find correct answers by process of eliminations. Of course, that's one way of taking the exam or the tests that makes use of the multiple choice question. They have to do process of elimination because that has been taught to us long before, that if we're going to take examinations that are done in multiple choice questions or multiple choice, we have to do process of eliminations to be able to get into the right answer. It's limited creativity. A good test takers can guess, and not applicable for all core subjectives. Okay, so if you have this objective, if you have a particular objective that does not need any multiple choice, then so be it. You cannot force multiple choice to have to be used for that certain course objectives. Okay, so let's now have the anatomy of a multiple choice question. So it has three parts. We have the stem, we have the alternatives, and we have the destructor. So the stem here is the sentence-like portion of the question, and the alternatives are the possible choices in the question, and destructor are the wrong answers placed in the alternatives. So if you would want to see that very clearly, for example, we have here, what is chiefly responsible for the increase in the average length of life in the USA during the last 50 years? So the stem is the question. So what is chiefly responsible for the increase in the average length of the USA during the last 50 years is our stem. And A, B, C, and D are called the alternatives, or simply called the choices. But these choices have to have destructor. The destructors are those that are wrong answers placed in the choices or in the alternatives. And then there is, of course, the right answer from there. But you have to remember, okay, you have to remember that this particular alternatives, this particular stem in destructor has a specific guideline to follow. Okay, has a specific guideline to follow. So this is very important to notice or to know that this parts of a multiple choice question, which are stem, alternatives, and destructor, should follow a certain principle or guidelines. So let's begin with the guidelines that are associated with stem. Okay, with our stem. And what's the stem? So the stem should be clear, brief, not comprehensive, and easy to read. Do not include irrelevant information in the stem. And the stem should pose a problem. Remember that the stem should pose a problem. So include repeated or redundant phrases in the stem instead in the alternatives. You would know that later as I'm going to give you the ways of constructing multiple choice questions already. So the stem, state the stem in positive form, avoiding words like except, but, and not. If these are all included, except, but, and not, they should have been, they should have been in boldface. So there is way of students to actually be prompted about the question. Write the stem in a complete sentence. Okay. Now, what about this, the alternative? Okay, so the alternative are the choices. So make sure the grammar and the syntax in the stem and alternatives is the same. So that means there is parallelism. And we know how parallelism would work and would create confusion among our learners and test takers. Because if they're not all the same in its grammar and syntax, this would lead confusion, or this would make confusion among our test takers or our learners. So your alternatives should be worded in a similar way, avoiding clues and keywords. Again, I'll be giving you examples, concrete examples of these later on. So you'd be able to see how it should be avoided in your way of constructing your test questions already. Okay, whether a question asked for a correct alternative or best response, there should be only one clear answer. So if you're looking for the best responses, you should explain that clearly in the direction. Okay, which of course the directions are part in the multiple choice questions principles on multiple choice question. All alternatives should be plausible. Okay, so that's one thing that you will also have to notice later. Keep the alternative parallel in form and length. Now remember, there is form and length so that the answer does not stand out from destructors. So this is very important. Sometimes our alternatives are funny, so our test takers are able to spot the destructors because they're all funny. Avoid the use of specific determiners like always, never, and only in the alternatives. And alternatives, all of the above and none of the above should be avoided because they reduce the effectiveness of question. If you may have seen other test items that have included the these alternatives like all of the above and none of the above, it should not be the right answer. Okay, some things the thought is you were missing out some sort of items, then you place it none of the above or all of the above. So, but sometimes you not make it as your answer. Okay. The alternatives should be presented in a logical order, like alphabetically and numerically. Okay. Destructor. What about our destructor? So use as many functional destructors as possible. Functional destructors are those chosen by students that have not achieved the objective or concept. Use a plausible destructors. Dili siya dapat destructors nga mas pat dayon ni mo dito nga wa na siya labot. Okay? So use familiar, not yet incorrect phrases as destructors, and avoid the use of humor when developing destructors. This is one thing that you have to remember. Do not make your destructors humorous. Okay? Sometimes there are words that are actually joke. Okay, here are general guidelines of the entire. Okay, I have to present with you the general. Okay, I have to present with you the general guidelines of these constructing the multiple choice. Okay, but I'll be going very much specific later. Okay, I'll be going very much specific later. Now, you should avoid using textbook verbatim phrasing. Okay, so this is also given later an example. Okay, which you have to avoid. Okay, which you have to avoid. You should avoid using textbook verbatim phrasing, because that would make students practically recall whatever has been written in the book. And the position of each correct answer in the list of alternatives should be as random as possible. If possible, have each position the correct answer an equal number of times. Because sometimes multiple choice, no, and then we don't have the machine checker for that. So we check individually. Sometimes for easy or for an ease reason, teachers would want to create pattern of the answers. Isn't that right? We are creating patterns so that when we check, dito lang ta mag-check. Okay, sometimes it happens, but let's not make it that way. Let's not be a teacher who gives pattern of answer in our tests or in our questions, because that's not a very good, that's not a very good assessment. And that's not a very good assessment, because sometimes the next time they would look for the pattern already. Okay, they would look for the pattern already. They would not already think about critically about your courses. So they would, their only cases, they would be able to find out the pattern that you are actually trying to have. So have each position to the correct answer an equal number of times. It should be random as possible. The layout of the multiple choice question should be done in a clear and consistent manner. So use proper grammar, spelling, and punctuation, especially punctuation, because that would create what? That would create very, very, that could really make a lot of things very complicated for our learners or test takers. Avoid using unnecessarily difficult vocabulary, because it's not vocabulary building. It's testing whether or not you have learned what have been discussed in the class. Not unless if it's a different story when you're testing vocabulary. Analyze the effectiveness of each question after each administration of a test, because a well-constructed test contains only few questions that more than 90% or less than 30% of students answer correctly. So difficult items are those about 50 to 70% answer correctly, and moderately difficult questions fall between 70 to 85% according to Davis in 1993. So you should expect each question to take approximately 1 minute to answer. So you have to, of course, this is also one thing that you have to consider. Because you have the knowledge already of how long the tests should be taken, you should have at least appropriated or constructed an item that is approximately 1 minute to answer. Okay, 1 minute to answer. For example, if you have an hour examination for a certain subject, you have to calculate that each of the question is approximately within 1 hour. Okay, within 1 hour. So that's one thing that you have to remember. Have a colleague review your test before you give it to students or your program coordinators, for example, or heads. right? So in order to produce a well-constructed test, you should begin writing questions in advance of the day before the test. And direction should be stated clearly. This is very, very, very important. Direction should be stated clearly in the beginning of each section of the test. Okay. Of course, use the right grammar, use the right word. Okay. Okay, so here are now very specific guidelines in constructing multiple choice question. A while ago, we were talking about, these general guidelines. Okay, general guidelines is for entirety. But let's now have very specific, okay, very, very much specific guidelines. Number one, construct each item to assess a single written objective. A single written objective. So items that are not written with a specific objective in mind often end up measuring lower level objectives exclusively or covering trivial material that is of little education worth. Okay, so I think it would help a lot for a teacher to specifically look into or go back to the kind of, objectives or outcomes you have placed in your syllabus. Again, as I said a while ago, if you have not included that in your table of specification, the objectives, then you have to go back to your syllabus. Okay. Number two, base each item on a specific problem stated clearly in the STEM. The STEM is the foundation of the item. After reading the STEM, the student should know exactly what the problem is. That's why a while ago I was talking about the specific guidelines to STEM, right? How do we come up with the STEM? And of course, the STEM should be in complete sentence, as I was saying. So reading the STEM, it should propose a problem, right? So the students would already know what problem is and what he or she is going to expect to do and solve. So if the student has to infer what the problem is, the item will likely measure the student's ability to draw inferences from vague descriptions rather than his or her achievement of a course objective. Okay, let's have, for example, here, a very poor example and a better example. California, A, contains the tallest mountain in the United States. B, has an eagle on its state flag. C, is the second largest state in terms of area. And D, was located in the gold rush of 1849. This is very much confusing because the STEM does not have even a problem, right? Does not have even the problem. So now we notice that this does not follow principles of STEM. So the STEM should bear or should propose a problem. If I were a student and if I were the test taker, I would not know what would I do with the question. Okay, so that's example of a poor, it's a poor example of constructing sentence or constructing the STEM as regards to how would you be able to direct students of what to do. I'd be confused. If I don't exactly know what to do, then I'd not be able to choose the right question, the right answer. How would I be able to choose letter D as the example when I'm not even told of what to do with the STEM? So that's exactly what I'm trying to talk about this time. That in creating a STEM or in writing the STEM, it has to be very much clear about what the student would have to do or what sort of inference that the student would be able to have upon reading the STEM. So they have to be direct as to which one would supply or would address or would be the right answer to the question. Okay, so the better example is, what is the main reason so many people moved to California in 1849? And the answer was gold was discovered in Central California. Okay, so that's one thing that we will have to consider here. The stem should pose a certain problem. Okay? Okay, another example. The direct question example. This is a direct question example. Okay. Which of the following was the principal keyboard instrument in 16th century Europe? So harpsichord, no? Or the incomplete sentence. Okay, the principal keyboard instrument in 16th century was the. You are not supposed to write it that way, because if I'm the test taker, I would not know what to do with the principal keyboard keyboard instrument in 16th century Europe was the. What do you want me to do as a test taker? So there's no concrete idea, or even some sort of what? Some sort of inference of what will I have to do as a test taker with this question. Okay, so that's a direct question. And if it's a direct question, we could not state it this way, like the incomplete sentence below, right? Okay, number 3, this is the third specific guideline. Okay, so include as much of the item as possible in the stem, but do not include irrelevant material. Because rather than repeating redundant words or phrases in each of the alternatives, we're talking about alternatives, place such material in the stem to decrease the reading burden and more clearly define the problem in the stem. Because remember, we're so much concerned about what kind of problem is being posed in the stem. Let's give an example. Okay. You would say here, if the pressure of a certain amount of gas is held constant, what will happen if its volume is increased? You have here repeated phrase. The temperature of the gas will. It could be placed, okay? It could be placed in the stem. Okay, so if you increase the volume of a certain amount of gas while holding its pressure constant, its temperature will. So that means I am now told about what will happen, right? Because I have given a situation there. It's an if clause. It's not a direct question, right? So I could have this in my question. So if you increase the volume of a certain, otherwise, if you would want that to be transformed to a direct question, why not? But if you have this kind of question, because not every question also could be direct question. You have to remember that. For as long as if there is a problem in the stem posted in the stem, then that would be, of course, very much, that would really work very much, right? But if this is an if question, if you increase the volume of a certain amount of gas while holding its pressure constant, its temperature will. So I'm now trying to avoid what? Repetitive words or phrases in the alternatives. Okay, in the alternatives. Next, another one. Okay. For example, okay, because we're talking about in as much of an item as possible in the stem, but do not include irrelevant material. Let's try to have this example. Okay, in the stem. Okay, these are you have a lot of in the poor example. You have a lot of irrelevant materials here. Like, for example, suppose you are a mathematics professor who wants to determine whether or not your teaching of the unit on probability has had a significant effect on your students. You decide to analyze their scores from the test they took before the instruction and their scores from another exam taken after the instruction. Which of the following t-tests is appropriate to use in this situation? There's nothing wrong. I mean, there's no very, very much wrong, but there are a lot of irrelevant materials already in the stem. Okay, we should not place that in the stem. So why not state it this way. The better example for that is when analyzing your students' pre-test and post-test scores to determine if your teaching has had significant effect, an appropriate uh, an appropriate statistics to use for its tests. An appropriate statistics to use is the t-tests for. So that means I am supposed to supply. So there's the problem. Okay, it's not a direct question, but there is a problem that is being posed. This is when you say when analyzing students, this is actually another form of stating, another form of structure. This is a complementizer when. So we are talking about beginning the question with a complementizer, which is actually the when. Okay, and if also is part of a complementizer. Now, in cases like we will have to make use of this, let's not have a lot of irrelevant materials in our STEM because that would again take a lot of time for students to read. Ang imuha lang man di ay gusto, kaya mong i-determine kung imong teaching na by effect ug unsa man nga test imong gamiton, right? So that's one thing that you have to remember. So when we have this example or when we have this kind of construction, we must not include a lot of irrelevant materials. Okay. Now, number 4, state the STEM in positive form. We're talking about the STEM, okay? That's in general. So negatively worded items are those in which the student is instructed to identify the exception, the incorrect answer, or the least correct answer. Sometimes which of the following are not a function of a mitochondria, for example. Okay, so the not there, which is negative, should have been in bold so that there is a prompt. But sometimes we need to, we need to state positively our STEM. So positive items, however, are more appropriate to use for measuring the attainment of most educational objectives. We can only use, okay, it is said here that state the STEM in positive form in general. If it's negative, because we wanted the students to identify the exception, that's what I said, except, diba? Sometimes the following are good examples of being, the following are the components of a human cell, except. The except there is also negative. But our purpose in using those that are negatively stated, the STEM, is for us to be able to, whether our students know or how to be able to get the incorrect answer because we have the except or not, which is the not, for example. Okay, so sometimes we have to balance this out in our test questions. So it's not always that, but in general, we have to state our STEM in a positive form. Okay. So number 5, word the alternatives clearly and concise. So we're now talking about alternatives now. A while back, we were talking about the STEM. At this point, we're talking about the alternatives. That means the choices that we have. So clear wording reduces student confusion. You have to remember this. Clear wording reduces student confusion, and concise wording reduces the reading burden placed on the students. We don't want to burden our students with a lot of things to read in the STEM and in the alternatives. Otherwise, we would be reducing our number of items because we are to consider the number of hours they have to take and finish the exam. Right? Okay, let's have an example here. Very poor because our alternatives are all too wordy. Okay, so like the term hypothesis as used in research as defined as number 1, or letter A, conception, a proposition, inform, a lot of things to read. And the way you look at it, magkapuyan na ang estudyante to read all this. Okay, to read all this. So why not give the proper way or the better way of constructing that? So right down in the bottom, you would see the better example of the ones that are up, the one that is up in there. Term hypothesis as used in research is defined as assertion explaining an observed set of facts that has not been conclusively established, or a universally accepted assertion explaining an observed set of facts, or a tentative assertion that is neither or either proved or disproved by comparison with an observed set of facts. So these are all things we can probably look into when we have to reconstruct it. Okay, number 6, keep the alternatives mutually exclusive. So what does this mean? So alternatives that overlap create undesirable situations. So they have to be mutually exclusive. Some of the overlapping alternatives may be easily identified as destructors. So on the other hand, if the overlap includes the intended answer, there may be more than one alternative that can be successfully defended as being the answer. Let's try to look into this. How long does an annual plant generally live? So the alternatives here is it dies after the first year, it lives after for many years, it lives for more than 1 year, it needs to be replanted each year. And you see the point there. There is, annual. So first year and each planted each year, so annually. So therefore, how do you make sure that these ones are not overlapping? Okay, at not overlapping. So how long does an annual plant generally live? Like your choices or your alternatives should be only 1 year, only 2 years, and then several years. So it is not overlapping. Okay. Keep the alternatives homogeneous in content. Okay. This is also very important. So if the alternative consists of a potpourri of statements, meaning a lot of statements related to the stem but unrelated to each other, the student's tasks become unnecessarily confusing. And the alternatives that are parallel in content help the item present a clear-cut problem more capable of measuring the attainment of a specific objective. Example, Idaho is widely known as the largest producer of potatoes in the United States, the location of tallest mountain in the United States, or the state with a beaver on its flag and the treasure state. Or the better way of doing it is Idaho is widely known for its apples, corn, potatoes, and wheat. Okay, so now we are now able to have homogeneous content. Our alternative has homogeneous content. What is this? These are all nouns. Okay. Number 8, keep the alternatives free from clues to which response is correct, right? So poorly written items often contain clues that help students who do not know the correct answer eliminate incorrect alternatives and increase their chance of guessing correctly. And such items tend to measure how clever the students are at finding the clues rather than how well they have attained the objective being measured. This is the problem mostly. Okay, because when we have to place alternatives in our exam, in our items, there has to be no clues that have to be given so that the students will be able to just see this, and we failed to measure the objectives we wanted to. So the following suggestions will help you detect, remove many of these clues from your items. Number 1, or 8.1, keep the grammar of each alternative consistent with the stem. All right. So keep the grammar of each alternative consistent with the stem. That's why it is very much important that you submit your questionnaire to your head so that this would be checked. Okay. Students often assume that inconsistent grammar, this is what the student assume, is sign of destructor, and they are generally right. Right? Okay, let's have an example. A word used to describe a noun is called an. So you have their adjective, conjunction, pronoun, verb. So mali. So there are no, this is something that is mistakenly written. So it should have been like, The word used to describe a noun is called an adjective, a conjunction, a pronoun, or a verb. So you would ask, sir, what about I place in my stem as a word clue, a word used to describe a noun is a slash an. You are still giving such kind of hint, right? So we avoid that. Another one. Which of the following would do the most to promote the application of nuclear discoveries to medicine? Okay, so train radioactive therapy specialists, developing standardized techniques for treatment of patients, do not place restrictions on the use of radioactive substances. If the average doctor is trained to apply radioactive treatments. Now, what's wrong with the example here? So there is no parallelism with the alternatives. Okay, so these are not placed under circumstance that they have the same structure. Look at look at the choices. Some other students would think that the inconsistent grammar is the sign of the destructor. Okay, and they probably must be right. So it's a trained reader. So that means letter B would be developing standardized techniques for treatment patients. But if you would want to have it better, uh, uh, yeah, constructed better, you say the alternative should have been adding trained radioactive therapy, developing standardized, removing restrictions, training the average. So what happens now with our alternatives? They're now in harmony and they're now having the same structure and they're now parallel to each other. And these are all, of course, gerund in this place, right? So now we're seeing that there is uniformity with the kind of alternatives. So from there, we're trying to avoid hints for students to be able to, find in our alternatives. So by that, we are, of course, adding, a little pressure among our test takers to be able to detect which one is the answer from the alternatives. So we follow the principle by having this expressed in the same structure. Okay, 8.2, keep the alternatives parallel in form. So if the answer is worded in certain way and the destructors are worded differently, the student may take notice and respond accordingly. For example, you just have spent 10 minutes trying to teach one of your new employees how long to change a typewriter ribbon. So the employee is still having a great deal of difficulty changing the ribbon, even though you have always found it simple to do. At this point, you should tell the employee to ask, tell the employee that you have never or you never review all the steps and then tell the employee. So that means when I'm the test takers, if I do not have, practically have studied this particular topic, I would want to choose letter C because this is one that is actually different from the rest, which is sometimes mostly true. Okay, so the better way of that is what? Ask, mention, review, and tell. So you are all going to restructure this according to its parallelism, as I was saying also a while ago. Okay, this is actually verb phrases. Okay, a while back that was a gerund phrases. Now we have verb phrases. Okay, 8.3. Okay, this is also very, very much technical. So you have to keep the alternatives similar in length. Similar in length. So that means you will have to know some others are very much oozy, meaning to say they have to just arrange all these questions according to its length. So from the shortest to the longest, or sometimes if they have the same length, they have to be properly stated or properly placed in the alternatives. So an alternative noticeably longer or shorter than the other is frequently assumed to be the answer and not without good reason. Right? Sometimes our test takers are taking that way. For example, which of the following is the best indication of high morale in supervisor's unit? It's a direct question. Now, the employees are required to word. The employees are willing to give first repository of to attaining group objectives and so on. The supervisor enjoys staying late to plan the next day, or the unit gives expensive birthday presents to each other. Okay. What is supposedly wrong in this case? Okay, what is supposedly wrong in this case? In our example, we have similar length. Okay, so which one is very, very long? The number letter B, right? Which is sometimes correct, but we would want to keep that same length with the rest of the alternatives. Okay, some others are very, as I said, very much oozy. They placed here letter A is the first and followed by letter C and followed by letter D, last with letter B. Sometimes they have been very much oozy for that. Sometimes I do that. I do checking on that matter also. Okay, 8.4. This is what I was saying a while ago. Avoid textbook verbatim phrasing. This was on the general guidelines. Okay, in the general guidelines of making multiple choice questions. So if the answer has been lifted, but sometimes we are fond of lifting questions and stems from the textbook verbatimly. So if the answer has been lifted word for word from the pages of the textbook, the students may recognize the phrasing and choose correctly out of familiarity rather than achievement. Kasi familiar siya, the way you phrase it, then automatically he chooses the right answer or she chooses the right answer without even having the reasons why. Because at this point, the student is already able to recognize the phrasing from the textbook. Okay, so how's an example for that? For example, the term operant conditioning refers to learning situation in which, okay, so the operant conditioning is very much, you know, given a definition in the textbook. Okay, so they're looking for a certain kind of familiarity. Okay, of familiarity. But now this time, you have to make sure that it should not be coming from textbook verbatimly, but the thought should have been there. For example, how do we place it in the better way? So you manage to say a familiar response and so on and so forth because it's letter C there, it's the answer. Now you look into the letter C. Letter C is a response of learner in instrumental in leading to a subsequent reinforcing event. So that's how an operant conditioning is looked into in a learning situation. But if it's betterly said or if it's done better or written better, it should have been the learner's response leads to reinforcements. This is how it is. Okay. So sometimes we have to rephrase, but with the same thought. The problem here is if you don't know how to rephrase, the thought could be different. So patay-taan na dirang apart. So we have to know that our rephrasing should have been aligned to the to the thought that is expressed in the definition or in the learning situation. Now, you would ask or you would say, sir, what if follow na lang yun lamang po? Again, in the principle, we have to avoid that so that we would not be able to give the students the clue. Otherwise, we're not measuring the objectives that we are actually trying to suppose the students would fulfill at the end of the examination. Okay, that's how easy it is. 8.5, you avoid the use of specific determiners. So when words such as never, always, and only are included in the structures in order to make them false, they serve as flags to the alert student. Now look into this. To avoid infection after receiving puncture wound to the hand, you should A, you have there always, a letter B, you have only, and C, never. These are all words that are considered to be determiners. Okay? Only, never, always are negative or negation or negative. Sorry, not negation. Negation is never. Only is also determiner, and always is also some sort of determiner. But these are all, I should say, descriptors. Okay, descriptors. So in that sense, you have to avoid this so that it would not make students, or it would not give students a clue that letter C might be the answer. So ensure that the students ensure that no foreign object has been left in the hand. Okay, so next, 8.6. Avoid including keywords in the alternatives. So when a word or phrase in the stem is also found in one of the alternatives, it tips the students off that the alternative is probably the answer. Look into this. When conducting library research in education, which of the following is the best source to use for identifying pertinent journal articles? So you have there the journal. Therefore, from the given from the given alternatives, you have there the clue for the journal. That means the student would not be able to choose letter A because it's a guide to source of educational information. I wouldn't be informed that this one is actually a journal, okay, if I don't have knowledge on that or particular knowledge on that source. And then how do we try to transform that in a better way? So education index could be also part, or could be also the way how it should be better constructed. Okay, numbers 8.7 ma? Yeah, 8.7. Use plausible destructors. So for students, is what I said a while ago. For the students who does not possess the ability of being measured by the item, destructor should look as plausible as the answer. So unrealistic or humorous destructors are non-functional and increase the student's chance of guessing the correct answer. This is it. For example, which of the following artists is known for painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel? Can you imagine you include their Santa Claus? So that's, I think, katawan kasi mong estudyante. Pero si mamo, ay wala na gin naisip ng mga choices bagi appeal na Santa Claus dira. So that means we will have to make sure that our destruction should be possible as the answer. That's possible. Okay, like for example, Botticelli, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. These are all very much possible. But of course, we're talking about Sistine Chapel, so that's Michelangelo. But if you look into here, Flintstone or Santa Claus, these are all things that we can probably, laugh at when we have to make sure an alternative should not be something that is so funny. Okay, so make sure that we have to use plausible destructors. Wag naman yung katawa-tawa. Okay, now we move on to number 9. Okay, avoid alternatives, all of the above and none of the above in general. So these two alternatives are frequently used when, okay, these are all things that are considerable at the point. When the teacher writing the item has trouble coming up with a sufficient number of destructors. So such teachers emphasize quantity of destructors over quality. So if you are making use of all of the above and none of the above, that means to say you're emphasizing quantity, not over the quality. So make sure that we will have to avoid that. Okay, but if you have a particular reason which could be really justified, that's fine, but please avoid these kind of alternatives. So use many functional destructors as are feasible. So functional destructors are those chosen by students that have not achieved the objective and are ignored by students that have achieved the objective. So in other words, they have positive discrimination, right? Example. Obsidian is an example of which of the following types of rock? Igneous, metamorphic, transparent, none of the above. Marag, 3 ramang good kabuok ang types of rocks. So why would you be including the rest? Remember, functional destructors. Okay? Functional destructors. Include one and only one correct or clearly best answer, okay, in each item. So when more than one of the alternatives can be successfully defended as being the answer, responding to an item becomes frustrating game of determining what the teacher had in mind when he or she wrote the item. So such ambiguity is particularly a problem with items of best answer variety, where more than one alternative may be correct, but only one alternative should be clearly best. So if competent authorities cannot agree on which alternative is clearly best, the item should either be revised or discarded. Okay? For example, okay, the United States should adopt a foreign policy based on. So because you wanted to be very clear about how it should be answered, and there should be only one, then we are now talking about authorities, according to Alfred T. Mahan. Okay, so that is also very clear. So that means we are directing the test takers or the learners to look into how or what did Alfred actually say about foreign policy. 12% answer in each of the alternative positions approximately an equal number of items into the random order or in a random order. Okay, let's try to see, example here. Logical order, alphabetical order, and sequential order. So it is very, very important. Okay, it is very, very much important that we arrange in a logical order our alternatives. Okay, sometimes all the rest of those that are actually have been discussed a while ago, they could be arranged in alphabetical, they could be arranged also sequential, in that numerical when you have these dates. Okay, dili pwede mag sak sinagol. Or alphabetical is also very much good aesthetically to our test questions. Okay, lay out the items in clear and consistent manner. So well-formatted test items that only make not only make taking the test less confusing and less time consuming for students, they also make the grading tests easier, especially when the grading is done by hand. The following suggestions may help you improve the layout of your items. Number one, provide the clear directions at the beginning of each section of the tests. Use a vertical format of presenting alternatives. Avoid changing pages in the middle of an item. Okay, for example, if your alternatives are vertical, it should be, of course, in a vertical format. Okay, if it is horizontal format, it should be horizontal. So avoid changing it all the time. Okay, for example here, okay, that's very, very much stupid when you are going to create or to have your example there as an example for the poor example, right? So that's something that is actually that should not be done. Okay, use proper grammar, punctuation, and spelling. So the guideline should be self-evident. Adherence to it reduces ambiguity in the item and encourage students to take your tests seriously. Avoid using unnecessary difficult vocabulary, again, because this is not vocabulary test. So if the vocabulary is somewhat difficult, the item will likely measure reading ability in addition to the achievement of the objective of which the item was written. As a result, poor readers who have achieved the objective may receive scores indicating that they have not. Therefore, use difficult and technical vocabulary only when essential for measuring the objective. Analyze the effectiveness of each item after each administration of the tests. So item analysis is an excellent way to periodically check the effectiveness of your test items, and it identifies items that are not functioning well, thus enabling you to revise the items, remove them from your tests. So or revise your instruction, whichever is appropriate. Okay, that's what I said when I say your your item analysis. So the item analysis would come right after when there's already the result, and that's already very much possible when you have already established, of course, a table of specifications as to how many items allotted for that, and what are those that are answered by many correctly, and what are those that are not answered many correctly, and remove them from your test, or even revise the instruction, or whichever is appropriate. Okay, so now these are the the 16 specific ways to you know create and construct test questions. So we are revolving our thought, our talk, to the STEM, to the destructors, and of course to the alternatives, especially with the STEM and that of the alternatives in general, because destructors are of course going along with the alternatives also. The STEM should be properly constructed in such a way, or in a manner, where you will have to follow these principles, okay, in a general way and a very specific way. So if we are able to see all through this, then we would be, I think, very much successful to create, especially on multiple choice questions, and without jeopardizing the Bloom's taxonomy. So what you will have here on this as the assessment is um, the kind of should I say, the kind of Bloom's taxonomy that is utilized in, because remember, multiple choice can make use of all components of Bloom's taxonomy, right? That's what we just said a while ago. So in this case, I want you to still go back to slido.com and notice that your answer should be knowledge comprehension, application, analysis, and evaluation. So what kind of STEM is this? What is addressed, or what Bloom's taxonomy is addressed in this kind of STEM? In the area of physical science, which of the following definition describes the term polarization? Okay, I want you to join me in slido.com, and I would want you to answer which one's address is being addressed among the Bloom's taxonomy with this kind of STEM. Because remember, our Bloom's taxonomy, or our multiple choice, can be, although I did not include here the choices because those are not our concern. Alternatives are not our concerns. The STEM is our concern. Even if we are already able to follow procedures with the STEM, then we should still be able to align this and address the Bloom's taxonomy, because these are also necessary in the TOS that you have probably constructed. So, okay, there are already two who are into our how's that? Into our Slido. I want you to answer these. The general question is, which Bloom's taxonomy component in the Bloom's taxonomy is addressed by this STEM? Okay, so there are those who answered knowledge. There is comprehension with 43%. Analysis is 7%. And then moving up is knowledge. Now you are seeing the poll is an active poll from everyone who is responding with the 22. Okay, with the 22, this is 50-50 of knowledge and comprehension. The answer for that is, of course, knowledge, right? The answer for that is, of course, knowledge. Now, what about this? Okay, cast your answer. Which of the following describes, for example, you have already the alternatives there, but I'd like you to go over with the STEM. Which of the following describes what takes place in the so-called preparation stage of the creative process is applied to the solution of the particular problem? What component of Bloom's taxonomy is actually addressed in this STEM? So there are still 4 who are responding about it. So I'll reveal later what is the answer to this. So there are still 12. So if I'm going to reveal that now, there are 71 for comprehension, and there are 85 for comprehension, analysis for 11. And of course, our answer to that is comprehension. Okay, comprehension. Okay, what about this one? Which of the following memory systems does a piano tuner mainly use for his occupation? So what kind of STEM or what kind of component of Bloom's taxonomy is this STEM addressing? Cast your answer. So there are 22, 23. Let me check. Okay. So others are doing analysis, comprehension, knowledge, of course. And we have application, 57 of the 30. And our answer, of course, is application. Okay. Next one. This one. Which one? Read carefully through the paragraph below. If you are given the paragraph, this is the paragraph. Which of the options A to D is correct? For example, if we're given A to D. The basic premise of pragmatism is that questions posed by speculative metaphysical propositions can only be answered by determining the practical consequence, period. So what kind of Bloom's taxonomy is being addressed by this STEM? Okay, there are 22, 23. So there is analysis. Okay, there is analysis. The answer is analysis. Okay. Okay. Now those are the some sort of assessment. Here are the checklists for reviewing multiple choice items. Has the item been constructed to assess single written objective for a particular topic? Is the item based on specific problem stated clearly in the item?